welcome to this week's book club for Star Wars Dark Disciple by Christie Golden. If you're not familiar with this series, we take a look at this book a couple of chapters at a time to break down the themes and happenings and really get into what the book is talking about. If you would like, go ahead and check out the description if you want to go back to the beginning and start with us from there. But today we're talking about chapters 18 and 19. As you might expect, I was really excited for how chapter 18 began. We see Obi-Wan. He was hanging out, waiting for Voss. Voss doesn't show up, which is, of course, kind of a bad sign. Voss, remember, broke his Jedi bracer, so he's not able to contact the Jedi anymore, communicate with them. So Obi-Wan, a little bit lost for what to do next, goes and visits Yoda. He arrives to find Yoda meditating, and the two have a conversation. Obi-Wan is concerned that Ventress might know the truth about Quinlan and talks about their last conversation. Just the word choice, the "she's faithful to me" bit. Obi-Wan says that he knows it's a little silly to be worried about such things, but he can't shake the feeling that something's up. Yoda pushes Obi-Wan past his concerns to the root of the issue, bringing up that Obi-Wan doesn't like the mission, that he's not comfortable with the mission to begin with, and says he isn't either, but at this point you kind of have to let the Force do as it will. He actually kind of hobbles over to Obi-Wan and puts a hand on his shoulder, which I thought was sweet, and says sometimes you have to walk through the darkness for a while in order to find the light. Obi-Wan thinks about this, and he's not sure if he's actually talking about Quinlan or maybe the Jedi Order as a whole. That the whole notion of this mission is a crossroads for the Jedi. And this crossroads is very important. I don't want to belabor this because it's a reoccurring theme in the novel, which means it keeps coming up in a lot of these videos. But it really, everything in this novel is about the point of where has a Jedi gone too far? And I think it's important to examine this part with Yoda, because the fact that this mission went forward at all was because of him. The fact that Ventress is involved at all is because of Obi-Wan's suggestion, but, you know, Yoda allowed it to go through. And yet Yoda is saying that he's not comfortable with this mission now. Is this him being wish-washy? Is this him backtracking? You know, if you don't have a good opinion of the Jedi, maybe you would think so. But I think at some level, and that could be my own bias, Yoda has an understanding that things just have to go a certain way, that he can feel the Force pushing things to happen without necessarily knowing why they need to happen. So not necessarily that he's pushing for Dooku to be assassinated, but seeing that the Force is at work here in this mission in some way. And I don't know that that's necessarily right. I don't know that agreeing to go along with having Dooku assassinated is necessarily the best way for Yoda to seek out the Force's will and have it happen. But I think this is kind of a running theme with the Jedi in this era in general, that they do genuinely want to follow the will of the Force, and they do genuinely want to see what that means, and they want to protect the people that they're supposed to protect, but it's that they've veered off the track. You know, they're not going towards the light side and pulling a 180 and heading towards the dark. They're just skewed, where they're really gonna miss it. They're really not necessarily going towards the dark, but they're really not necessarily going towards the light, and they're just kind of stuck on this veered off path, this warped path that doesn't really get them to where they need to go. And I think Yoda's few scenes, but important scenes so far in this story, help to illustrate that. Voss and Ventress arrive on Raxus, and they have to get in better clothes, right? They can't just show up in their Dathomir battle clothes. Ventress plays this smart and parks several cities over, and they go shopping. And Ventress says she's going to handle this. Voss doesn't necessarily know what he needs to do. He's always worn incredibly practical things, doesn't know what he needs to wear to go to a ball, and he gets utterly surprised by how gorgeous Ventress is when she's dressed up. And he does the classic thing that guys tend to do when they're mesmerized by someone, where he's thinking about Ventress in complete and utter poetry and isn't able to speak to her, that he is still concerned even talking to her, even though they've also, you know, it's not like they haven't had intimate and vulnerable moments with each other. He's kind of still discovering her. I think this is something kind of important to their relationship. Again, I believe that the relationship between the two of them is founded on and built on real things, but I think it's important to not get entirely swept up by that, because, again, Ventress isn't being completely truthful at this point. Voss didn't go into it being completely truthful, and all of their relationship is surrounded around Voss playing with the dark side. The idea is reinforced to me when there's the implication that on Dathomir they got to know each other pretty well, but he's still shy seeing how beautiful she can be. And that to me says that there are real emotions at play, there is a real relationship at play that's growing, but then there are other things that are just passions from the dark side that are also at play, and that those two things aren't necessarily the same, and that those are easy to conflate, maybe even for a character like Voss. Not as much for Ventress, I think, but to kind of keep in mind the duality of the relationship budding between them. That the moments where Voss has these more genuine is not necessarily the right word, but these more, I don't know, cutesy moments towards her are moments where he's not pushing himself down the dark path, versus what happens between them when he does. Besides Voss still being at a loss for words, we see that Ventress is actually embarrassed that he would look at her that way and be so moved by how beautiful she is, that there's this vulnerability between the two of them. You know, I think it's important to keep in mind that as much as this is a story about these two characters falling in love, it is also a story about whether or not the Jedi are falling away, and it's impossible to separate those two things going on as we read. To further illustrate that point, as they're walking out of the ship and Voss is trying to get his confidence back and tries to swoop Ventress up into his arms, her contact shows up. And the contact has done everything Ventress wants, given Ventress everything she needs, didn't fail her in any way, is acting completely subservient to her, and Ventress kills the contact so that there are no loose ends. And Voss is still struggling with the fact that this woman that he loves is also super dark side and does super dark side things all of the time. And it still rattles him. And he has to get over this cognitive dissonance in a way. And he does it by continuing to rationalize his mission to go and assassinate Dooku, as Dooku has to be stopped. To the point where he even lays Ventress's contact's death at the feet of Dooku, saying that this contact would be one of the last people who would ever have to be killed because of Dooku. Even though Dooku doesn't even know this person really exists and very well could have never caused this person's death. Voss is putting the death there because it's a death needed to ultimately stop Dooku. So we see Voss playing these games to justify the things he knows that are wrong so that he can keep a thing that he thinks is right. And the love between them can be right, even if they're going about it in a wrong way. Those two things don't have to be mutually exclusive. They get into the party through a Jedi mind trick with the guard at the door. Ventress says it's a sign of Dooku's arrogance that he wouldn't be prepared for Force users to come after him. Of course, it's really just the Night Sisters and the Jedi who would be coming after Dooku at any given point in time, and they're both Force-sensitive groups that Dooku has bested, so he would have that arrogance, although it's somewhat of an earned arrogance. As they go through the party, Voss is still distracted by how Ventress looks, and then Dooku shows up and starts giving a hologram speech, and they listen for a little bit, but they're mostly disgusted. The biggest wrench in the whole thing is that General Grievous is there, so they're not going to be facing Dooku alone, and they have to come up with a plan to separate Dooku and Grievous so they don't have to face them together, since it's already going to be hard enough to beat Dooku on his own. As Dooku gives his speech, he talks about a corrupt republic, which we have seen to be true, and he talks about how the Confederacy uses droids instead of clones, that if they do have soldiers that were not grown, that they're volunteers, not people just being used, and Voss says that Dooku kind of has a point, and he really does. Now, that doesn't make Dooku a good person, but it does show that this war within the Republic isn't as unjustified as we might want to believe in a simple good and evil tale. That what we see is, in large part, we see this throughout the Clone Wars, we see it in many other Star Wars books and comics, is that the Confederacy of Independent Systems is filled with a lot of good people that are being used by really terrible people. I think there was a time that Dooku would have cared about the citizens of the Confederacy, and at some level he might think he still does, but the dark side has clouded him at this point, and he serves the will of Palpatine, and he knows that whatever galaxy he brings about, he's bringing about under Palpatine's rule. It's just a lot of really bad things wrapped up in something that sound really good because it's based on a truth, but much like the Jedi, thinking that they're going after the light side and following this warped path, you have the Confederacy, which is trying to get away from the corruption of the Republic, but ultimately is just skewing away from anything that's really going to help them. Ventress makes up a plan to separate Grievous and Dooku. At some point, Voss drops a line about, "When have I ever let you down?" And he's doing this to hopefully cheer Ventress up, and it actually makes her really sad. Ventress will say later in the chapter that it made her sad because she knows she's letting Voss down. She knows that she's lying to Voss in order to get him in a certain mental state in order to kill Dooku. And of course she doesn't really want to kill Dooku for the good of the galaxy. She wants to kill Dooku because she wants to kill Dooku. So she knows this guy is head over heels for her and will trust her and do whatever she says and is giving up his whole life for her, and she's lying to him. And this is starting to gnaw at her a little bit because there is a bit of a good heart still inside of her shell. And that's the conundrum she finds herself in. She is not sure she can match Voss's commitment to her, and it's largely because she's afraid of who she is. If you take away the lies and the deception and the betrayal and all of the dark-sidey things, who is she and who's left? Is there anything there to be loved? That so much of what she's done in her life has been built upon lies. The idea that somebody could just genuinely love her for her is absolutely terrifying. And so in a lot of ways, this lie she's keeping with Voss about his master, yes, is to put him in a position to better be able to murder Dooku, but in some way, it's also a protective shield for her, because she has to be lying or she's not sure who she is. That's how in deep she's gone to the dark side. She snaps out of all of this as she gets closer to Dooku. As she gets closer to Dooku, Dooku ultimately senses her, and then she says, "Hello, Master," from behind, startling him quite a bit, and that's where these chapters leave off. So there's a lot to digest here, just like I said, about the Jedi in general, about the Republic in general, but really also about where these two characters are going. More about Ventress and getting to the crux of what she's dealing with after spending so much time getting to know more about what Voss is dealing with, but certainly some of his journey too. I'd love to know what you guys have to say, especially what you think of their relationship at this point in the story. For next time, we're going to read chapters 20, 21, and 22. So 3 chapters total, 20, 21, and 22. Please, if you're not already, follow us on all of the socials, and I'll talk to you guys next week.